The iPhone 17 Pro Max is one of the most solid phones I've reviewed, especially from a hardware standpoint. But now that Samsung's new flagship is out and I've been using one for a few months, can it actually hold its own against the iPhone? Well, in certain areas it sure can, and in others, well, it might surprise you. Let's dive in. One of the biggest differences with these phones is their display. Samsung has included a built-in privacy display using their Flex Magic Pixel technology. This phone basically has a privacy screen built into its display. And it's actually cooler than that because Samsung can turn this feature on and off at the pixel level. So, say you get a sensitive notification from a certain app, it can just apply the privacy screen tech to that notification on the screen. They basically eliminated the need for a privacy screen protector on this phone, and honestly, you wouldn't want to put one on it anyways because of Samsung's excellent anti-reflective coating. While Apple does now have a new anti-reflective coating with their upgraded Ceramic Shield 2, Samsung's Gorilla Armor 2 is still superior when it comes to reducing glare. One trade-off to be aware of though with this new display tech is off-axis color accuracy does take a noticeable hit. So who wins the display category? Well, Samsung definitely earns a point for the privacy feature and better anti-reflective coating, but because Apple's color of its display is better, especially off angle, you just can see it easier, I'm also going to give it a point there as well because I think that will matter to some people. Next, form factor and design. To me, they look equally aesthetically pleasing. Both have a nice industrial feel and camera plateau that protrudes from the body. Though, if you decide to use your phone caseless, the S26 Ultra wobbles way more on a flat surface than the iPhone. Where these phone designs differ even more is weight. The iPhone feels a good bit heavier at 233 grams compared to the 214 grams on the S26 Ultra. Point here goes to Samsung. Now, one area where Apple has a clear edge with their phone design is MagSafe. Samsung only includes MagSafe-like support in their cases and accessories, but it's not built into the phone itself. A point goes to Apple for that. Now, one more thing worth knowing in this category is the iPhone 17 Pro Max did get a 7 out of 10 repairability score from iFixit thanks to a screwed-in battery, while the S26 Ultra only got a 5 out of 10 score, so I would also give another point to Apple here for having an easier to repair design. And speaking of apps, I've had an idea for a better recipe app rattling around in my head for a long time. Now, I can write some code, but I'm not really a developer. But thankfully, there are tools like Lovable, who sponsored this video, that exist to solve that exact problem. Lovable lets anyone turn an idea into a real working app just by describing what they want. And I love how robust it is. There's a build versus plan mode built right into the UI, so before it starts building, you can have a conversation with it and lay out a full plan for what it's going to do. And when it wasn't entirely clear what the design direction was, it stopped and asked me to clarify which approach I wanted to take. It felt like working with a collaborator who actually understood what I was trying to accomplish. Plus, I love that you can throw multiple complex requests at it all at once. It also caught and fixed errors on its own without me having to diagnose anything. And with the built-in visual editor, fine-tuning your app design is really simple. And I love that you can queue your next prompt while it's still building the current one so you don't lose that next idea you had. And what I love most is where Lovable can take your app ideas next. It's easy to put in user accounts authentication, plus connect it to Stripe and other platforms. So check out Lovable using the link in the description and start building something you'll love today. All right, next up, let's talk cameras. Overall, though not universally true, Apple does a better job with color. A good example was at a graduation ceremony that I shot with both phones, where Apple got the color coming from LED lights correct, and Samsung made the UNC blue look kind of purple. And when zooming in, you'll see that Samsung also has a tendency to produce sharper images, which comes from them turning up the sharpening and clarity sliders a bit more aggressively than Apple. So how do these two compare when you shoot in RAW? Honestly, they look more similar than you might expect in a lot of shots, but the differences that do show up are consistent. Apple's colors skew a bit warmer, and that does occasionally skew too warm, like this shot of Hogsmeade at Universal Islands of Adventure, where it just looks a bit off. And Samsung, even in RAW, still tends to blow out shadows rather than just preserve them, which means Apple shots often look more like what the scene actually looked like when I took the photo. And Samsung still has a tendency to add in too much saturation even in the RAW mode. You can see it clearly in wide shots with the sky, and night RAW is the same story. Samsung applies noticeably more denoising, and the coloring is just quite a bit more saturated and quite a bit different than what this scene actually looked like in real life. And that LED light issue I mentioned earlier, it still shows up in the expert RAW mode. So in general, a lot of the same things that you'll notice in Samsung's normal processing with the main camera app, that will still show up when you shoot in expert RAW. Now, another area where you'll really notice Samsung crank up the saturation and vibrance sliders is when it detects flowers. It just loves doing that. And for macro shots, I do prefer the more consistent bokeh that Apple's camera produces. The selfie comparison between these two phones did net an unexpected result. The S26 Ultra looked a bit less overprocessed than I expected, and I often preferred the selfies from Samsung. Moving on to night mode and nighttime shots, differences between the two become way more pronounced. Samsung applies way more noise reduction and smoothing than Apple, and the coloring differences we talked about earlier also apply here as well. Now, for pro video, both phones do support shooting in log. How do these videos actually look? Well, here are a few observations. First, I took both of these phones to my husband's PhD ceremony, so like not a low stakes situation. Overall, Samsung did a better job of setting the black point at the graduation ceremony that I filmed, though I was able to correct it from the iPhone because I shot this shot using the Final Cut camera app, so that made it easier to adjust when I brought it into Final Cut Pro. Samsung also does a better job with default stabilization when you want to pan. However, Apple's mics are noticeably better. The S26 Ultra's audio sounds just a bit too harsh in the highs. And moving on to night mode, here I thought Apple just did a better job. It doesn't crank up the exposure as much, which keeps footage looking less noisy and more natural. And the iPhone also did a better job handling bright flames against a dark sky, where Samsung struggled to render this as naturally. And Apple's color accuracy in night video, especially with LED and colored lighting, just looks to me more true to life. So which phone has the better overall camera system? Well, after shooting both of these, seeing the results of what these camera systems can do, I'm going to give the point to the 17 Pro Max. Though if you disagree, definitely let me know in the comments. Next up, battery life. Now, both phones, based on my usage of around 2 to 2.5 hours of screen time and 1 to 2 hours of background activity for music and podcasts, can push close to 2 full days on a charge, for me at least. Wireless charging speed is the same on both at 25 watts, while wired charging is where Samsung pulls ahead. Samsung claims it can reach a 75% charge in 30 minutes, while the iPhone can get about 50% in roughly 20 minutes. Given how close the battery performance between these two phones has been for me, I'm calling this one a tie. Next, on the CPU side, the iPhone continues to outperform in single-core performance, while the S26 Ultra edges ahead in multi-core. Where things get really interesting is with GPU. Apple dominates graphics benchmarks from 3D Mark, especially in ray tracing tests like Solar Bay Extreme. And in the Steel Nomad benchmark, the gap is quite a bit closer between the phones. Now, one thing I noticed after running these benchmarks is the S26 Ultra runs noticeably warmer than the 17 Pro Max, which makes sense at a certain level given that the iPhone has the combination of the vapor chamber and the aluminum unibody acting as a heat sink. But given the S26 Ultra also has a vapor chamber and an aluminum build, I was surprised that it gets that much hotter than the iPhone. For performance, I think this one is also a tie. Next, let's talk operating system and features. Now, in general, Samsung's One UI OS still offers more customizations, plus features like split screen, which Apple still can't do, and Android still handles notification triaging better than iOS. Apple has their new liquid glass design, which features this new type of digital material that has the translucency of glass, but then also has some properties of a liquid. In terms of overall basic features though, they're more similar than you might expect. Widgets work comparably. Samsung's Quick Controls is almost the exact same as Apple's Control Center. Where they do diverge quite a bit is with their AI and machine learning features. Samsung has noticeably more AI-powered features baked in, like the Now Nudge, which helps anticipate your needs in a way similar to Google's Magic Q. And you get Gemini on the phone, which is way more capable than Siri right now. And then there's the S Pen on the S26 Ultra, which adds a whole nother layer of functionality. Handwriting recognition, note-taking, using it as a magnifier, selecting text with precision, the list goes on. For most people though, the day-to-day differences that you'll actually notice for things like how you navigate the UI, Android's app drawer versus Apple's app library, little things like that, which really aren't all that different between the two phones. I would be inclined to say it's a tie in this category, but given some of the issues with liquid glass and Samsung's better customization, and especially for notification management triaging, plus it's got Gemini built in, I actually think Samsung is the true winner in this category. Now let's talk about ecosystems. You get features like the ability to text on all your different devices and take phone calls on your different devices, the ability to copy something on one device and paste it onto another. But in general, I do think Apple, it often at least feels like they take these features a bit further than Samsung, like a better implementation of being able to use your phone on your Mac. Apple just does this a bit better because they make the OS for both devices. While Samsung makes laptops, they still have to rely on Windows to make a comparable feature work. Or for things like a more consistent rollout of ultra-wideband across phones and watches for things like unlocking door locks or interacting with AirTags. Samsung is just now catching up to where Apple has been with features like Home Key, using your phone to tap to unlock a smart lock. Though some features like AirDrop and AirPlay are becoming less of a moat for Apple, thanks to Google's ability to now have Quick Share work directly with AirDrop, Samsung has started to really catch up to Apple with some ecosystem features and accessories. So much so that I'm inclined to put this category as a toss-up. Though if you disagree, definitely let me know in the comments. Now let's talk mic quality. Now the iPhone's mic performance in the videos that I've looked at between both these phones impressed me as being better than the S26 Ultra, but here's what they both sound like when we're just concentrating on voice alone. All right, and this is a mic test for the iPhone 17 Pro Max. This is what its mics sound like in one of the best environments you're ever going to hear it in, a studio environment. All right, and here's a test for how the S26 Ultra's mics sound in my studio environment. Let me know which one you thought sounded better in the comments. For mic test, I'm giving the point to the iPhone. Now, speakers tell a similar story. The iPhone wins there as well. It has a more dynamic sound with better mid-range and low-end for a phone speaker, of course. Now, its highs I found can occasionally be just a bit too piercing, at least for my ears, but I do prefer its sound over the S26 Ultras. Now let's look at price and overall value. The iPhone 17 Pro Max actually retails for $100 less than the S26 Ultra here in the US, though you can often find the S26 Ultra on sale from time to time, whereas I don't see many sales with the iPhone. And you can see what each one is currently going for in our blog post linked here and in the description, along with all of the products I talked about in this video. So which phone do I ultimately think is better? Well, if you go by the points, the device that has the better camera system, MagSafe, repairability score, speaker, mic, and that's going to be the 17 Pro Max, which did rack up more points than the S26 Ultra. Now, of course, in this comparison, I did try to be as objective as possible here, but bias inevitably can leak in when you're doing a comparison like this, so If you disagree with my methodology or how I applied points to these phones, definitely let me know in the comments and which phone you think is ultimately better. And make sure you follow us at 6monthslater.net for updates on Samsung and Apple products that we cover. For 6 Months Later, I'm Josh Tedder, and if you made it all the way to the end here, let me know by commenting Flex Magic. Thanks for watching.